The first time I heard my daughter's fiancé say, once she's my wife, she won't need her father's opinion anymore, I was sitting less than 4 feet in front of him, and he had no idea who I was. 2 minutes later, he laughed and told his coworker that my daughter would get over leaving Kansas City. Then he said her job was sweet, but not exactly a career worth building a life around. By the time we reached the plaza, he had already decided where she would live, when she would quit working, how often she would see us, and which holidays belonged to his family. My daughter knew none of it. She was 8 weeks away from marrying him. I wanted to pull the car over, turn around, and tell him exactly who was behind the wheel. I didn't. That decision nearly cost me my daughter, but what happened at their wedding welcome dinner made an entire room realize that the man she was about to marry had planned a beautiful future for himself and had simply assigned her a role in it. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived in the Kansas City area for most of my life. For 31 years, I taught automotive technology at a community college in Overland Park. I wasn't a wealthy man, but I did all right. I owned my house, had a decent retirement account, drove the same pickup for 12 years, and had learned long ago that a person could waste half a paycheck trying to look richer than they were. My wife, Karen, used to tease me that I could diagnose a bad transmission from 3 parking spaces away, but couldn't tell when she was mad until she started loading the dishwasher aggressively. She died 5 years ago after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. There are losses that divide your life into before and after. Karen was mine. Our only daughter, Sophie, was 29 when her mother died. Those two had been inseparable. Sophie called Karen every morning on her drive to work and almost every afternoon on the way home. After the funeral, the silence between those calls became one more thing we both had to learn how to survive. Sophie is 34 now. She works as a pediatric speech therapist at a rehabilitation center in Lenexa. She helps children who have suffered strokes, traumatic injuries, developmental delays, and conditions that make ordinary words feel like mountains. She has always had patience I don't possess. When she was 12, she spent an entire summer teaching our elderly neighbor's grandson how to ride a bicycle, because nobody else had the patience to keep running beside him after he fell. That is Sophie. She believes people are usually worth another chance. Sometimes that is her greatest strength. Sometimes it scares me to death. 2 years after Karen died, Sophie met Graham Hale at a charity fundraiser for Children's Mercy. Graham was 36, polished, ambitious, funny when he wanted to be, and the regional development director for a luxury senior living company. He grew up in Street, Louis, went to Northwestern, wore watches that probably cost more than my first car, and seemed to know the wine list at every restaurant in town. Sophie was crazy about him. I tried to be happy for her. In the beginning, I honestly was. He brought flowers the first time he came to my house. He remembered Karen's name. He told Sophie he admired the work she did. He helped me carry folding tables into the garage after Thanksgiving. He was never openly disrespectful. In fact, that was what made everything so complicated later. Graham understood manners. He knew how to shake a hand, how to compliment a meal, how to make older relatives laugh, how to stand beside Sophie in photographs and look like the safest man in America. But there was always something about him that made me feel as though he was performing for a room only he could see. He never asked questions unless the answer could somehow circle back to him. If I talked about teaching, he told me about the professor who had personally recommended him for a fellowship. If my brother mentioned his fishing cabin, Graham talked about a resort in Montana. If Sophie told a funny story from work, Graham usually interrupted halfway through because something similar but more impressive had happened to him. None of that made him evil. It barely even made him unusual. Plenty of people like the sound of their own voice. Sophie saw other things in him. He made reservations. He planned trips. He remembered birthdays. He was decisive. After spending 3 years with a boyfriend who could barely decide what he wanted for dinner, Sophie found Graham's confidence reassuring. He makes me feel like I'm not carrying everything alone, she told me once. I wanted that for her. God, I wanted that for her. So when Graham proposed on a rooftop overlooking downtown Kansas City, I hugged them both, opened an expensive bottle of bourbon I had been saving since retirement, and told myself that whatever discomfort I felt belonged to me. The wedding was scheduled for September. Then retirement got too quiet. I had stopped teaching 18 months earlier, and after one winter of reorganizing every cabinet in my house twice, my sister told me I needed either a hobby or professional help. I chose the cheaper option. A former student managed a private transportation company that handled airport transfers and executive rides for hotels, hospitals, and corporate clients around Kansas City. He needed part-time drivers. I liked cars. I liked people in small doses. Most importantly, I liked having somewhere to be before 9 in the morning. So 3 mornings a week, sometimes 4, I put on a gray company jacket, a black cap, and drove one of their SUVs. Most passengers barely looked at me. That suited me fine. Graham became one of my passengers by accident. The company had just signed a transportation contract with the senior living group he worked for, and one Tuesday morning his name appeared on my schedule. Graham Hale. Pickup. Leawood. Destination. Downtown Kansas City. I stared at the screen for a full minute. My first thought was that I should swap the assignment. My second was that it might be funny. Graham had only been around me maybe a dozen times, mostly at family dinners where he spent more time talking to Sophie or checking his phone than studying my face. I had also grown a heavy gray beard after Karen died, then shaved it completely the previous winter. Add a company cap, reading glasses I wore for driving, and the fact that Graham almost never looked directly at service workers, and I apparently became invisible. He climbed into the rear seat that morning, said morning, without lifting his eyes from his phone, and spent the entire 25-minute ride answering emails. He didn't recognize me. I couldn't believe it. When I told Sophie later that day that I had driven someone from Graham's company, I stopped short of telling her it was him. I'm still not proud of that. At the time, it felt harmless. 2 days later, he was on my schedule again. Then again the following week. Soon, I was driving my future son-in-law to work 2 or 3 times a week, while he treated me like a moving piece of upholstery. At first, I learned nothing interesting. He took calls about occupancy reports, construction timelines, staffing problems, investor presentations. Occasionally, he complained about traffic. Once he spent 15 minutes arguing with a restaurant because they had lost his reservation. I actually started feeling foolish for finding the whole thing suspicious. Then came a Thursday in late June. The heat had already settled over the city before 8 in the morning. Graham got into the SUV wearing a navy suit and carrying iced coffee. Before I reached State Line Road, his phone rang. "Tell me you got approval," he said. Someone answered. Graham smiled. "Perfect." I kept driving. "No, she doesn't know yet." I glanced at him in the mirror. He was looking through his email. "Because there's nothing to discuss until it's final." A pause. "Sophie will be fine." Hearing my daughter's name changed the temperature inside that car. Graham laughed. "Seriously, Mike, she asked questions because her father trained her to second-guess everything." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "Once we're married, she won't need her father's opinion anymore." The man on the other end apparently said something funny because Graham laughed again. "Exactly. Marriage changes priorities." I remember every word because I repeated them to myself for days afterward. Graham continued. "She's still very attached to Kansas City. Her dad, her cousins, that little clinic. But that's temporary. Little clinic. Sophie worked for one of the busiest pediatric rehabilitation programs in the metro area. She had a master's degree, specialized certifications, and families who requested her by name. Graham spoke about it like she volunteered twice a week at a bake sale. Once she sees what Denver gives us, she'll understand. Denver. I almost turned my head. Denver? Sophie had never mentioned Denver. Graham kept talking. The transfer comes with a serious raise. Better market, better visibility, and honestly, some distance from her family would be healthy. There it was, not just a move. Distance from me. From us? He said it casually, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Her dad means well, but he's too involved. She needs room to become her own person. I wanted to laugh at the irony. Sophie had bought her own condo at 28, paid off her student loans, changed jobs without asking me, traveled alone to Europe, buried her mother beside me, and then somehow returned to work 2 weeks later because a 6-year-old patient had finally started speaking again, and Sophie refused to miss the appointment. She did not need Graham Hale to teach her independence. Yet I said nothing. When we reached his office, he ended the call, gathered his briefcase, and said, "Thanks, Dan." That almost made me react. He knew my first name. He still had no clue who I was. I watched him disappear into the building and sat at the curb longer than I should have. My first instinct was to call Sophie immediately. I didn't. Maybe there was context I didn't know. Maybe Graham had applied for a transfer, but planned to discuss it before accepting. Maybe distance was a poorly worded joke. Maybe the wedding had turned me into the stereotypical suspicious father every daughter warns her fiancé about. I needed to be sure before I dropped a grenade into my daughter's life. That Sunday, Sophie came over for dinner. I grilled chicken on the back patio. She made corn salad using Karen's recipe and complained that mine always had too much lime. It was one of those evenings that made the empty chair at our table hurt less. Halfway through dinner, I tried to sound casual. "What's the plan after the wedding?" Sophie gave me a look. "The honeymoon?" "Life." "Very specific question, Dad. You guys staying around here?" She laughed. "Where else would we go?" My stomach tightened. "Never talked about moving?" "Graham talks about buying a different house eventually." She took another bite. "Maybe Prairie Village, maybe somewhere closer to my clinic." "Denver ever come up?" She stopped chewing. "Denver?" "Just asking. Why would Denver come up?" I shrugged too quickly. Sophie noticed. She had inherited Karen's ability to detect bad lies from across a room. "What's going on?" "Nothing. Dad. I met somebody from Graham's company who mentioned they were expanding west." That part was technically true. Sophie studied me. "Okay, just wondered." "No, we're not moving to Denver." Then she smiled. "I finally got my office the way I like it. I'm not starting over somewhere else." That night, I barely slept. The next time Graham got into my car, I listened differently. I hated myself a little for it. He wasn't whispering. I wasn't recording him. I wasn't digging through his phone. I was simply hearing conversations he chose to have 3 feet behind a stranger. Still, it felt wrong. Then Graham made it impossible not to pay attention. Over the next month, I learned that the Denver transfer wasn't an idea. He had accepted it. He had negotiated a start date for October. He had toured apartments in Cherry Creek during a business trip Sophie believed was a conference. He was already discussing membership at a private club. One morning, he called a relocation coordinator and said, "I don't want Sophie dealing with the details. She gets sentimental." Sentimental. That was Graham's word for anything he didn't value. Her work was sentimental. Her attachment to Kansas City was sentimental. Sunday dinners with me were sentimental. The Christmas Eve tradition she had with Karen's sisters was sentimental. Even the cedar chest her mother left her became sentimental clutter when Graham found out Sophie intended to take it into their future home. At first, the comments came individually, small enough to explain away. Together, they formed a picture I couldn't unsee. He didn't dislike Sophie's life. He simply considered his version of her future more important than the one she had built herself. I finally told my sister, Melissa. She was 65, a retired elementary school principal, and the only person alive who could still make me feel 12 years old with a single look. We met for breakfast in Westport. She listened without interrupting, then stirred her coffee for a long time. "Are you asking whether you should tell Sophie?" she said. "Yes." "No, you're not." I frowned. "What am I asking?" "You're asking how to tell her without risking her being angry with you." That irritated me because it was true. Melissa leaned back. "You don't get that guarantee. I'm her father." "Exactly, which means she already knows you have opinions." He accepted a job 2 states away without telling her. "Then tell her that. She'll think I'm attacking him." "Maybe." "Great advice." Melissa ignored my tone. "Your job isn't to win. Your job is to make sure she has information about her own life." I went home feeling worse, not better. 3 days later, Sophie called while I was changing the air filter in my kitchen. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Her voice sounded cautious. "Always." "Do you dislike Graham?" I froze. "Why?" "Because he thinks you do. There are moments when a parent knows honesty will create pain and lying will create worse pain later. I chose badly." "I'm still getting to know him." Sophie sighed. "You've known him almost 2 years. That doesn't mean I know everything about him." Silence. "He said you make him feel judged." "I barely say anything to him." "That's part of it." I almost laughed. "I'm sorry my silence is aggressive." "Dad, please." The exhaustion in her voice stopped me. "What happened?" I asked. Sophie hesitated. "We had an argument last night." "About you." That hurt more than I expected. Graham had told her I relied on her too much since Karen died. He said our Sunday dinners made it hard for them to build their own traditions. He said I called too often. He said Sophie made decisions based on whether they might disappoint me. There was enough truth mixed into his exaggeration to make it powerful. I did call her often after Karen died. Too often, probably. There were months when Sophie and I leaned on each other because neither of us knew how else to stand. I had worked hard to stop doing that. But guilt is easy to reactivate when someone knows where the switch is. Maybe he has a point, Sophie said. About some of it, I swallowed. Maybe. I love you, Dad. I love you too. But I'm getting married. Things have to change. I stared at the family photograph above the kitchen doorway. Karen, Sophie, me on a beach in South Carolina, all of us sunburned and happy and completely unaware of how short some chapters can be. I know, I said. That evening, I almost decided to let the whole thing go. Maybe Graham was right about me being too involved. Maybe I was hearing everything through the ears of a lonely widower, terrified of becoming unnecessary. Then the next morning, Graham climbed into my SUV and spent 20 minutes explaining to a friend how he planned to get Sophie to quit her job. She won't do it before the wedding, he said. She has this whole independence thing. He laughed. But once we move, the commute won't matter because there won't be a commute. The person on the phone asked something. No, she hasn't applied anywhere in Denver. Graham sounded amused. That's the point. If she gets settled at home for a few months, she'll realize how much easier life is. He paused. We don't need two careers. I need flexibility. She needs stability. I nearly spoke then. I had to press my tongue against the back of my teeth. He continued. And eventually we'll have kids. You think I want daycare raising them while she spends 12 hours a day helping somebody else's children? Something inside me went cold. Sophie did not work 12-hour days. She did not hate the idea of being a mother. She also did not dream of abandoning a career she loved because her husband had already decided his mattered more. When Graham got out, I drove to a grocery store parking lot and called Sophie. She didn't answer. I left no message. That night, she called back. Everything okay? Can you come by this weekend? Why? I need to talk to you. Her voice immediately changed. About Graham? I should have lied. I didn't. Yes. A long silence. Dad, I can't do this. Do what? Keep defending my relationship to you. I'm not asking you to defend anything. Then what are you asking? I'm asking you to hear something. No, her voice cracked. You've been waiting for him to fail since the day we got engaged. That isn't true. It feels true. Sophie? Mom would have been happy for me. That sentence shut down my entire body. I knew she regretted it the moment she said it. I could hear her inhale. Dad, your mother wanted you happy. My voice sounded far away. That's all she ever wanted. I didn't mean, I know. I ended the call before either of us said something worse. For 9 days, we barely spoke. Graham continued riding in my car. He had no idea that every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he was making my relationship with my daughter more fragile. The cruelest part was that he still wasn't a cartoon villain. One morning he called Sophie and spent 10 minutes comforting her because one of her patients had taken a sudden turn for the worse. His voice was gentle. He told her he loved her. He offered to bring dinner. I listened and felt completely confused. I wanted him to be fake. It would have made everything easier. But Graham loved her. I believe that. He simply loved her in a way that left almost no room for who she already was. He loved the version of Sophie that fit his plans. He loved her kindness when it supported him, her flexibility when it benefited him, her loyalty when it protected him. Her independence, her work, her family, her preferences, those were obstacles he expected marriage to solve. That distinction mattered. It was also why Sophie had trouble seeing the danger. Control doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it makes dinner reservations. Sometimes it pays for vacations. Sometimes it says, trust me, I know what's best for us. A month before the wedding, the situation got worse. Graham's parents hosted a planning dinner at an upscale steakhouse. I was invited, along with Melissa and 2 of Sophie's bridesmaids. I arrived early and found Sophie outside near the valet stand. She looked tired. You okay? I asked. Fine. That didn't sound convincing. Can we not? I nodded. During dinner, Graham's mother, Eleanor, announced that Christmas would be at their lake house outside Branson. Sophie looked surprised. This Christmas? Eleanor smiled. Of course. Your first Christmas as a married couple. Sophie glanced at Graham. I thought we were doing Christmas Eve with Aunt Melissa like usual. Graham didn't look at her. He cut his steak. We talked about maybe changing that. You said we'd figure it out. Eleanor laughed lightly. Sweetheart, once you're married, you can't keep running back to your childhood traditions forever. The entire table went quiet for half a beat. Sophie forced a smile. I felt my blood pressure rise. Melissa put her hand on my knee under the table, which was her way of telling me not to become the evening's entertainment. Graham finally looked at Sophie. We'll work it out, but he said it in the tone of someone postponing an argument he expected to win. 20 minutes later, while Sophie was in the restroom, Eleanor looked at me and said, "You'll enjoy having some freedom too, Daniel. Daughters tend to cling to fathers after losing their mothers." I stared at her. Sophie doesn't cling to me. I didn't mean it negatively. She smiled. Graham is simply helping her move forward. That was when I understood this wasn't only Graham's thinking. He came from a family where love and authority seemed interchangeable. His mother had already begun talking about Sophie, as though marriage meant transferring her from one household to another. On the drive home, Melissa said, "I would have thrown my steak at her if it cost less." I laughed for the first time in days. Then she grew serious. "You need to tell Sophie." "She won't listen." "Then stop trying to make her listen to you." I looked over. "What does that mean?" "Ask questions." That Sunday, Sophie finally came over to collect a box of Karen's Christmas ornaments she wanted for her new home. She stood in my living room wearing jeans and one of her mother's old Kansas City Chiefs sweatshirts. For a moment, I almost said nothing. Then I remembered Melissa's advice. "Do you want to move after the wedding?" Sophie looked at me sharply. "Why are we doing this again?" "Just answer." "No." "Do you want to quit your job?" Her eyebrows drew together. "No." "Do you want Graham deciding when you see me?" "Dad, I'm not asking whether you love him. I'm asking what you want." She put the ornament box down. "Where is this coming from? Do you want to spend Christmas with his parents every year?" "We haven't decided that." "Do you feel like the two of you decide things together?" Her face changed. Barely, but I saw it. "Yes." I waited. Sophie looked away first. "Mostly." That word frightened me more than a flat lie would have. I didn't mention Denver. Not yet. Instead, I said, "Before you marry anyone, make sure your life still sounds like your life when they describe the future." She became angry instantly. "There. That's exactly what Graham means." "What?" "You say things like that and then pretend you're not trying to influence me. I'm your father. Of course I influence you. So does he. The difference is I'm telling you I'm doing it. You don't trust my judgment. I trust it enough to want you making the decisions." "I am." "Then good." She grabbed the box. "You're exhausting." "Probably." "I mean it." "So do I." She left angry. I let her. That was new for me. My old instinct would have been to follow her outside, call twice, send an apology, fix the discomfort immediately. Instead, I stood in my living room and allowed my daughter to be angry with me. Boundaries work both directions. 2 weeks later, Graham told a colleague about the big reveal. He was hosting a wedding welcome dinner the Friday before the ceremony at a renovated event space near Union Station. About 70 guests were invited: family, bridal party, close friends, people from both workplaces. Sophie believed it was simply a rehearsal-style gathering because their actual rehearsal would be private. Graham had something bigger planned. "I'm announcing Denver Friday night," he said from the back seat. My chest tightened. "She still doesn't know?" the other man apparently asked. Graham laughed. "She knows I've been considering a few opportunities." That was a lie. "I'm making it exciting. Video, photos, the whole thing. I've already arranged a weekend trip for us to go house hunting." Another pause. "She'll be emotional at first, but with everybody excited for us, she won't turn it into a debate." I almost slammed the brakes. That sentence told me everything. The audience wasn't there to celebrate Sophie. The audience was pressure. Graham planned to surround her with applause, congratulations, champagne, his parents, his coworkers, her family, and then announce a life-changing decision she had never made. If she objected, she would be the woman ruining her own wedding weekend. He wasn't merely surprising her. He was cornering her politely. For the first time, I spoke to him about something personal. "Can I ask you a question?" Graham looked up, surprised that the driver had a voice. "Sure. You married?" He laughed. "Saturday." "Congratulations." "Thanks. Does your fiancé like surprises?" "She thinks she doesn't." I looked at him in the mirror. That wasn't my question. He frowned. I continued driving. "My wife hated surprises." "Yeah?" "Especially the kind that required her to smile before she had time to think." Graham studied the back of my head. "This one's different. Maybe. You've been married? 32 years before she died. His expression softened. Sorry. Thank you. Any advice? The irony was so thick, I almost laughed. Don't confuse getting agreement with not giving someone room to say no. Graham was silent for maybe 5 seconds. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down, and whatever thought had entered, his mind disappeared. Good advice, he said. 2 minutes later, he was telling someone to make sure the Denver skyline video played right before his announcement. That night, I made the decision I had been avoiding. I told Sophie the truth about the rides. All of it. I called her and asked her to come over. She refused. So I said, Graham has been one of my passengers for months. Silence. What? The transportation company I drive for has his corporate account. You're joking. I wish I were. He knows? No. Her breathing changed. You've been driving my fiancé around without telling him who you are? Yes. Without telling me? Yes. Oh my God. Sophie, that is insane. I know how it sounds. No, Dad, I don't think you do. She was furious, and she had every right to be. I had let the situation continue too long. I had told myself I was gathering certainty. Part of me had also been afraid that once Graham knew who I was, the window into his real thinking would close. I never followed him. I never looked through anything. He talks in the car, constantly. So you listened. I was driving. You should have told me. Yes, months ago. Yes. Instead, you decided you knew what was best for me. That accusation landed like a punch because it was exactly what I hated about Graham. I sat down at my kitchen table. You're right. Sophie went silent. I repeated it. You're right. I made a decision for you because I thought I was protecting you. My voice cracked. And that is exactly why I need to tell you everything now and let you decide what to do with it. She didn't say anything for several seconds. Then, quietly, tell me. So I did. Denver, the transfer, the apartment tours, the comments about her job, Christmas, the plan for her to stop working, the remarks about me, the welcome dinner announcement. I told her the exact sentences I remembered and clearly separated them from my interpretation. I did not call Graham controlling. I did not tell her to cancel the wedding. I did not say, I told you so. When I finished, Sophie said nothing. I could hear traffic through her phone. Finally, she whispered, he said Denver was just somewhere his company might expand. I closed my eyes. He accepted the position. How do you know? Because I heard him discussing the start date. When? October. Another silence. He told me October was when we should start trying for a baby. I felt sick. Sophie, don't. Her voice went flat. Please don't say anything else. Okay. I need to think. Okay. And Dad? Yeah? Do not come to my apartment. Do not call Graham. Do not fix this. I won't. That may have been the hardest promise I ever kept. For the next 48 hours, I heard almost nothing. She texted once. I'm safe. I need space. I didn't ask what safe meant. I didn't ask whether Graham was there. I didn't ask about the wedding. I simply wrote, I love you. Take all the time you need. Friday arrived. The welcome dinner was still happening. That surprised me. At 4 that afternoon, Sophie called. Are you coming tonight? Only if you want me there. I do. What happened? I said I needed time. To Graham? Yes. And? She gave a strange laugh. He told me I was overwhelmed by wedding stress. I stared at the wall. She continued. Then he said we could talk after the weekend. Sophie? I know. Her voice sounded different. Not broken. Awake. I asked him directly whether he accepted Denver. What did he say? He said he wanted tonight to be special. That answer told me enough. The event space glowed that evening. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the city. White flowers covered the tables. Framed photographs of Graham and Sophie stood near the entrance. There was a picture of them hiking in Colorado, another at a Chiefs game, another from Christmas at my house with Karen's old stockings hanging behind them. Looking at those photographs made the entire night feel unreal. People hugged me. Sophie's coworkers asked if I was emotional. Graham's uncle made a joke about finally giving my daughter away. I wanted to tell him she wasn't mine to give. Sophie arrived at 7 wearing a dark green dress that had belonged to Karen. She had altered it slightly, but I recognized it immediately. My throat tightened. She hugged me. Mom's dress. I know. I needed something that felt like me tonight. That sentence told me more than she realized. Graham arrived 10 minutes later, kissed her cheek, and acted as though nothing was wrong. He moved through the room smiling, greeting guests, thanking everyone for coming. His parents were radiant. Eleanor hugged Sophie and whispered something that made Sophie's jaw tighten. Around 8:30, after dinner plates were cleared, the lights dimmed. Graham stepped onto the small stage. A large screen behind him displayed a photograph from their engagement. He gave a beautiful speech, truly beautiful. He talked about timing, partnership, destiny. He talked about how Sophie had made him a better man. He talked about the family they would build. People smiled. Sophie stood beside him, holding her champagne glass with both hands. Then Graham said, "Marriage is about having the courage to step into the next chapter together." The screen changed. A drone shot of the Rocky Mountains appeared. People murmured. Sophie didn't move. Graham smiled at her. "So I have one last wedding surprise." Denver's skyline filled the screen. This fall, Sophie and I are starting our married life in Colorado. Applause exploded around the room. Eleanor clapped first. Graham's coworkers stood. Somebody whistled. A bridesmaid gasped, "Oh my God!" For 3 or 4 seconds, Graham's plan worked perfectly. The room celebrated before Sophie could speak. Then I watched my daughter do something I will remember until the day I die. She placed her champagne glass on the table. She did not smile. The applause faded unevenly. Graham turned toward her. "Surprise." Sophie looked up at the screen, then at him. "When did I agree to move to Denver?" The microphone carried her voice through the entire room. The last few claps died. Graham's smile tightened. "We talked about this." "No." "Sophie, you talked about opportunities. I said I didn't want to leave Kansas City." Graham chuckled nervously and turned partly toward the audience, as though they were all in on a harmless misunderstanding. "This is exactly why I wanted to make it exciting." Sophie stared at him. "You thought 70 people clapping would make it harder for me to say no." The room went completely silent. I saw one of Graham's coworkers look down at his shoes. Eleanor stepped forward from her table. "Sweetheart, maybe this conversation," Sophie turned toward her. "No, I think this conversation has been delayed long enough." Graham lowered the microphone. "Can we step outside?" "Why?" "Because this is private." Sophie gave him a sad smile. "You made it public." Nobody breathed. Graham's face reddened. "I accepted an incredible opportunity for us." "For us?" "Yes." "What job did I accept?" He hesitated. Sophie continued. "What clinic am I working at in Denver?" No answer. "What day did I resign from my current job?" "You don't need to work immediately." Several people shifted in their seats. There it was. The line I think ended the relationship before Sophie even knew it. She stared at him. "I don't need to work?" "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." Graham stepped closer. His voice dropped, but the microphone still caught part of it. "You're emotional." Sophie laughed once. There was no humor in it. "There it is." "What?" "Every time I disagree with you, suddenly I'm emotional, overwhelmed, sentimental, scared, too attached to my family, too obsessed with independence." Graham looked around. "Where is this coming from?" Sophie glanced at me, just once. Then she looked back at him. "From listening." His eyes followed hers. They landed on me. Confusion appeared first. Then recognition arrived slowly. I watched his face change as he finally connected the driver he had ignored for months with the man sitting beside his future bride at Thanksgiving. "Dan?" he whispered. I stood, but I did not approach the stage. Graham stared at me. "You?" I nodded. "Yeah." His face drained. Eleanor looked between us. "What is going on?" Graham's eyes narrowed. "You've been spying on me?" I answered calmly. "You've been talking in the backseat of a company car. You deliberately hid who you were. I should have told Sophie sooner. I've already apologized for that." Sophie looked at Graham. He did. Graham seized on it instantly. "Do you hear how crazy this is? Your father has been monitoring me." Sophie shook her head. "Stop. He is manipulating you. Stop. This is exactly what I've been talking about. He can't let you have your own life." Sophie's expression changed. "My own life?" Graham realized too late what he had said. "That isn't what I meant." "No, I think for the first time tonight you said exactly what you meant." She took one step back. "You keep talking about me having my own life while you've been deciding what that life is." "I was building a future, without asking me, because I knew you'd be afraid. Without asking me." "Sophie, please." You accepted a job without me. It doubles my. You toured homes without me. I was trying to. You told people I'd quit my job. We don't need. You told your family I'd stop spending Christmas with mine, Eleanor interrupted. Nobody said stop. Sophie turned. You told me married women can't keep running back to childhood traditions. Eleanor's face stiffened. That is not what I meant. Then everyone seems to mean a lot of things they never actually say until I disagree. Nobody at the tables moved. Sophie looked back at Graham. Tears filled her eyes now, but her voice remained steady. I kept thinking love meant I should trust your intentions. I kept telling myself that if you planned everything, it was because you cared. I defended you to my father. I defended you to my friends. I even started feeling guilty for wanting to keep parts of my own life. Graham reached for her hand. She stepped away. Sophie, I love you. I know. That surprised him. It surprised me too. She wiped one tear from her cheek. I believe you love me. Graham's shoulders loosened slightly, as though he thought that sentence had saved him. Then Sophie finished. But I finally understand that being loved by someone is not the same as being respected by them. His hand dropped. That isn't fair. Fair? Sophie looked around the room. You announced my relocation to 70 people because you thought applause would be easier to manage than my opinion. No one looked at Graham now. Even his closest friends seemed uncomfortable. He lowered his voice. What do you want me to do? Turn down the promotion? Sophie shook her head. You still don't understand. Then help me understand. I don't want you to turn it down for me. What? Take the job. Graham looked stunned. Go to Denver. Sophie. Build exactly the life you plan. Her voice broke slightly. Just stop calling it ours. She pulled off her engagement ring. No dramatic throw. No shouting. She simply held it out. Graham stared at it. Don't do this tonight. Sophie gave a small, exhausted smile. You chose tonight. He didn't take the ring at first. Sophie placed it gently on the edge of the podium. Then she stepped down from the stage. The entire room remained silent. When she reached me, I stood. I wanted to hug her. I didn't. Not until she nodded. Then my daughter collapsed against my chest for maybe 3 seconds, gathered herself, and stepped away. Can we go? Anywhere you want. She looked back toward Graham. No, that's the point. Her voice was quiet. I'm driving myself. I almost smiled. Okay. Sophie left alone. I stayed long enough to tell Graham one thing. He stood near the stage with his parents, pale and furious and humiliated. When he saw me, he said, Are you happy now? I thought about that question carefully. No. He seemed surprised. I wanted her happy with you. You destroyed this. Maybe I helped her see it. You poisoned her against me. I shook my head. You announced Denver. Graham looked away. I would have given her everything. That was the saddest part. He meant it. She wasn't asking you to give her a life, Graham, I said. She wanted you to share one. Then I left. The wedding was canceled the next morning. Sophie sent one message to the guests. The ceremony will not take place. I appreciate your kindness and ask for privacy. No details. No social media war. No dramatic posts. Graham called her repeatedly for 3 days, then switched to long messages. He apologized. He explained. He promised counseling. He offered to decline Denver. He told her he had only been trying to create security. Then, when apologies didn't work, the messages changed. He accused her of embarrassing him. He said she had allowed her father to sabotage them. He said she was throwing away the best thing that had ever happened to her. That last sentence finally made Sophie stop answering. Eleanor sent me a message saying I should be ashamed for interfering in a private relationship between 2 adults. I wrote one sentence back. I agree relationships between adults should allow both adults to make decisions. Then I blocked her. Sophie was not instantly okay. That matters. Too many stories make the brave decision look like the painless one. It wasn't. She cried. She missed him. She questioned herself. She canceled vendors, returned wedding gifts, and spent one awful afternoon deleting engagement photos while sitting on my kitchen floor eating takeout noodles from the carton. Twice she asked whether she had overreacted. Once she admitted that part of her wanted Graham to come through the door and explain everything in a way that made sense. That doesn't make you weak, I told her. It means you loved him. She looked at me. You hated him. No. Really? I hated what he was doing. I thought for a second, Sometimes I hated his face too. She laughed so hard, she started crying again. Healing did not happen in a straight line. The first Sunday after the canceled wedding, I automatically started preparing dinner for two. Sophie didn't come. She had dinner with a friend instead. Before all this, that would have hurt me. Instead, I felt strangely proud. A few weeks later, she skipped another Sunday because she joined coworkers for a lake weekend. Then she went 3 weeks without coming over because she was busy. I didn't complain. I had spent months worrying that Graham would separate Sophie from me. I eventually realized the goal was never to keep her close. The goal was to make sure closeness remained her choice. 6 months later, Sophie applied for a leadership position at her rehabilitation center. She had talked herself out of applying twice before because Graham said management would make her too married to work. She got the job. 8 months later, she sold the condo she had planned to share with Graham and bought a little brick bungalow in Brookside with crooked floors, a tiny backyard, and a kitchen that needed more work than she could afford. I helped her replace cabinet doors. She chose everything else herself. One Saturday, we spent 6 hours painting the dining room. At the end of the day, I looked around and said, "You know, your mother would have picked a different color." Sophie froze. I let the silence sit for a second. Then I added, "And she would have been wrong." Sophie threw a paint roller at me. It missed by a foot. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. Almost a year after the wedding that never happened, Sophie invited me to dinner at her house. Melissa came too. So did two of Sophie's friends from work. No fancy table settings. No speeches. Burgers, potato salad, beer, music playing from a speaker on the porch. At one point, I noticed Karen's cedar chest beneath the front window, the same sentimental clutter Graham had wanted Sophie to get rid of. On top of it sat a framed photograph from Karen's last Christmas. Sophie caught me looking at it. "You okay?" "Yeah." She leaned against the wall beside me. "I've been thinking about something." "That's dangerous." "Very funny," she smiled. "I was furious with you. I remember. Not just because you hid the driving thing. You had every right. I was angry because part of me already knew something was wrong." I looked at her. She stared toward the backyard. Every time Graham decided something for us, I told myself it was because he was better at planning. Every time he corrected me, I called it confidence. Every time he made me feel guilty for saying no, I called it compromise. She swallowed. "And when you started asking questions, I got angry, because answering them meant admitting I had been explaining away things for a long time." I didn't say anything. Sophie looked at me. "You still handled it badly." I laughed. "There she is." "Seriously. Months, Dad?" "I know." "That was insane." "I know. And creepy. A little. Very creepy." "Fine." She smiled. "But you did one thing right." "Only one?" "When I finally knew the truth, you didn't tell me what to do." That meant more to me than she knew. Because if I learned anything from Graham Hale, it was that control can disguise itself as protection. Fathers can do it too. Parents can love their children so fiercely that we start believing fear gives us authority. It doesn't. Sophie did not need me to choose the right husband for her. She needed room to hear the truth and permission to trust herself once she did. And she didn't need Graham to design a perfect future for her either. A relationship is not love simply because someone says, "I'm doing this for us." Sometimes the most important question is whether there was ever really an us in the decision at all. Graham moved to Denver. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he did well professionally. As far as I know, he never became some ruined, miserable villain. That isn't how life always works. People can hurt you and still succeed. They can lose you and still move on. Your healing cannot depend on watching them suffer. Sophie learned that faster than I did. She never tried to embarrass him online. She never posted screenshots. She never turned their failed wedding into public revenge. She simply stopped giving him access to her life. That was her revenge, if you want to call it that. Personally, I think it was something better. It was self-respect. Last Christmas, Sophie hosted dinner at her house. Aunt Melissa came. Karen's sisters came. Halfway through dessert, Sophie's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen, turned it face down, and kept talking. I never asked who it was. A year earlier, I would have. That may be the biggest change in this entire story. I finally understood that loving someone does not entitle you to every detail of their life. It means respecting the fact that it is theirs. Before I left that night, Sophie handed me a container of leftovers and said, "Dad?" "Yeah?" I'm glad you heard him. I smiled. I'm glad you listened to yourself. So let me ask you something, because people in my family still disagree about this. If you discovered that someone your adult child was about to marry had secretly planned their career, their home, their family relationships, and their future without their consent, would you stay out of it because they're adults? Or would you risk your relationship with your child and tell them everything you knew?